Welcome back to Restless. I'm Father Joseph Gill coming at you from Norwalk, Connecticut, along with Lauren and Father Perrella, who are going to talk about an interesting topic that we've never discussed. I don't know how we've gotten through 220 something episodes without discussing the Lord of the Rings.
It's funny because I find all sorts of excuses to bring Lord of the Rings up in casual conversation. So I don't know how you have managed to go this far either.
So I'm assuming you're a big fan.
Gigantic.
You're a big fan, Lauren?
I wouldn't say I'm a big fan.
But you did see the movies.
I've seen the movies, yeah.
I've seen the movies. I've never read. I started reading the first book, but after 100 pages and they weren't out of the Shire, I was like, this is too long. And so I gave up.
Many such cases.
Are the books better than the movies, in your opinion?
Overall, I think the books are better, but I think the movies are good art in their own right.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that.
I actually got into Lord of the Rings first through the movies and watching them extensively before I was able to read the book. I made my first attempt at reading Lord of the Rings when I was in 7th grade, and I think I got about as far as you, along with the Hobbits. I got lost in the Old Forest around the time of Tom Bombadil, and then I just, I don't know, really. I just lost my interest. I didn't actually read all the books all the way through until senior year in college. What I needed to kind of prime the pump was watching the movies. So these random elvish names and places, and I needed some help with my imagination to keep it all straight in my head. So that way, while I'm reading, I'm not just doing this exhausting mental work of trying to remember what's going on and
who's that guy? What did he do?
Yeah.
And this is my critique of a lot of literature that's considered great, is that it's boring as heck. I don't know if did you find that in high school?
I'm probably more with you, Father.
You read books that you were like, why is this classic?
Yeah, I don't know. People love The Great Gatsby. They say that all the time. I had to read that. I didn't love it.
No.
I
don't
love it now.
Charles Dickens. Oh my gosh, Tale of Two Cities. One of the worst books I've ever read.
Also slow.
Very slow. Very slow.
Yeah.
I heard he was paid by the word. That's why it made it so slow. Could be true. I don't know. But yeah, so Lord of the Rings.
We're just not literary people.
Maybe not.
Not.
We can't appreciate finer things in life.
Yeah.
I think to appreciating, there's different things to appreciate in books, and there's different styles of literature that are good in their own way. There's a difference between jazz and folk music, and classical music and pop music, and there's something good in each of those. They're different,
but there's snooty people who think that the classical music lovers who think that everything else is trash.
Right, and that's just not true.
And that's the snooty people who like Charles Dickens.
Yeah, the merits of something like a great books program is beyond the scope of our conversation here.
That's right. We're getting way off topic.
But I think one of the reasons that the Lord of the Rings has stood the test of time and
has been 70 years.
Yeah,
it wasn't. You'd think it was from the 1300s, but it was written in the 1950s.
Yeah, it's
60s?
Written over quite a long, a number of years. But yeah, I want to say it was published in the 60s. I can't remember for sure.
Yeah, it's become an instant classic, really.
Yeah, it really shaped fantasy as a genre of literature. Certain archetypes and tropes that we're used to in fantasy novels either were created by Tolkien or he popularized and made them something universal.
So what has resonated so well in you from this series?
Oh geez,
why did you take to it
so much? One of the things that I love about it is I'm a very imaginative person, and I love a good adventure story, and I love fun nerdy stuff with castles and knights and wizards. I've liked that since I was a kid, but I think that there's an ability for myths, fairy tales, folk tales, fantasy stories to tell
Well, they
to
speak about universal truths,
right.
right?
They have an ability to tell the truth in a way that just reporting on something's truth doesn't get at. There's some things that you can say more clearly in poetry than in prose. Telling an adventure story, even if the characters aren't real or the events didn't happen, it may still be a true story.
Yeah.
Because of the true things that this story describes or helps you to understand. So that's one of the things I love about Lord of the Rings, because there's Tolkien first, he originally just set out to write, a fairy tale in the broad sense, not just kind of in like a children's sense, but like to write a fantasy story. People, when he was getting popular as a writer, were like, well, what does this mean? Did the orcs represent Nazi Germany or the communists? And he's like, no, they're orcs. They have a whole history, and that has nothing to do.
It's not social commentary,
right,
at the moment. Yeah.
So he set out to write. He just wanted to write a good story and build a good world.
But that's been challenging for a lot of people over the century, like
over the decades.
Over the decades, right? Because unlike perhaps Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which is a very clear Christian allegory, a lot of people have looked at Lord of the Rings and tried to find who's the Christ figure, who's the Satan figure, who's the and I think it's not as clear, perhaps. Do you agree, or do you think it?
I agree, and that was intentional. Tolkien in his there's a collection of his letters. It's really cool. He lived long enough to see his own work become quite popular, and people would write to him asking about it, and he would answer questions. And so we have his own commentary on the meaning and the deeper things underneath what he wrote. And he said, yeah, this is not an allegory. I did not write this to be like, okay, well, this, the lion is Jesus and this person is the devil. There isn't a one-to-one correlation of things in the story with specific things in our faith or in our religion or people, like God, like the different saints, like angels. However, Tolkien said that while he started to write Lord of the Rings just out of a love for the art of writing and of myth and fantasy, he said it over time became an intentionally Christian and Catholic work. He says this in his own words. The Lord of the Rings is a fundamentally religious and Catholic work. It didn't start that way, but as it grew and in the revision, it became that because he allowed what he believed to be true to just kind of soak into the groundwater and into the air. So and he says this himself, you're not going to find in Lord of the Rings any, there's almost no references to God or higher powers or any type of temples or worship or prayers or religion. And that's not because it's an atheistic world or a world absent of God. It's because he wanted to communicate those truths differently. First of all, this world that he created was meant to be a fictional version of a prehistorical world. So fictionally, this is a time before Christ. So Christ wouldn't be there. But God is. And in the story, you do find little hints, little ripple effects of the things God has done and is doing. And once you start looking for them, you're going to find them all over the place in the book. And that's what my love really came alive, is because I started to see, I was learning things about God through this story. I was coming to a deeper understanding of how God works through the story.
I want to get into that in a minute, about kind of some of the Catholic themes that are found there. But let's talk a little bit more broadly, because I guess, is it possible or is it intrinsic if any Catholic or Christian true believer makes a work of art, whatever it is, movie, music, book, whatever, do you think that elements of their faith are necessarily going to be woven in? I mean, I'm thinking of one of my favorite bands is Switchfoot. So kind of an indie California rock band, surfer rock. And their first couple albums were very explicitly Christian. I mean, played on the Christian radio station, and then they kind of got away from that, but you can still see a lot of themes. And they asked them, "Are you a Christian band?" And they said, "Well, we're all believing Christians, but like we're just making music. It's not about like making Christian music, you know.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think?
Man, I guess I would hope so. But I think, on the flip side of the music industry, there's clearly so many demonic influences.
Well,
And
yeah.
it's so much about sin, right? That's what people are singing about, and yet they're probably Christian,
Mm.
right?
Like Kanye
'Cause I think
West, who
most
had his
people
Christian
are.
phase.
Well, so many, female singers have some song about lesbian acts,
Well, Katy Perry was a Christian.
kissing a girl,
Katy Perry
right?
was a
I
Christian
kissed a
singer.
girl, right?
Yeah,
It's this catchy
that was
song,
Katy
but
Perry.
what
She was a
message is
Christian
she
girl at one
sending?
point.
She's probably a Christian, right?
Oh, yeah, she was on Christian radio. Yeah,
But how about today?
I don't
I mean,
know.
I would hope so that she's still a Christian.
She hasn't done much lately. I don't know.
Well,
What's up with her, but
who a person is always going to shape what they do. Like this is a kind of a
Right.
fundamental principle. Like
action
who,
follows being.
right.
Yeah.
And so who you are, but there's a lot to who a person is, and until we reach eternity, we are going to be a mixed bag of good and bad and different kind of shades in between. And so, I mean, there's plenty of musicians out there, writers, painters, different artists who you find this kind of, you find a real mix of the light and the dark and the good and the bad, and even
I
you
think
see
like
them wrestling with it.
Salvador Dali, who I love his paintings. You ever seen Salvador Dali's?
Love them.
I do. They're so unique, just like fresh. And a lot of them are, about Christ, like his crucifixion, his Last Supper. And he was a tortured man.
Yeah.
From what I understand, like psychologically messed up, which you can see in some of his work. But
Yeah. And like I still, they're still sitting on my bookshelf, and I haven't actually read them, but I keep meaning to read a number of things by Graham Greene, who
oh yes,
who I'm
Power
told,
and Glory.
Yeah,
Yeah,
The
that
Power
was
and the
that was a good book.
Glory,
Also
the end of the affair, Brighton Rock. People that
I've seen that movie, The End of the Affair.
I have not seen.
Oh,
the
I have.
movie.
I
What-
thought it
what'd you
was
think?
terrible.
Oh, was it really?
But I found it so boring.
What?
But
Oh.
I don't know.
Interesting intersection back with Lord of the
Sorry.
Rings about like people who like how well does a book translate onto a screen, and I don't know either of those stories well enough to be able to comment on that, but I do know that like Graham Greene is an example of somebody who I'm told like you definitely see in his writing this tug of war in himself where like he's pushing away from Christ and his Catholic faith and also can't quite get away from it.
But that I think is the genius of Catholic media versus Protestant media. You ever watch like Protestant movies like God's Not Dead or Thank Goodness Spare Yourself?
Yeah,
Or,
I couldn't. I don't think I could bring myself to
like,
do that.
Some of the stuff.
I'll do
that,
it for
like,
Lent.
Fireproof, or I don't know, like some of the stuff that like some of the Protestants like. They're just morality plays. That's all they are. Good and evil are very clear. There's no ambiguity. But Catholicism admits that there's ambiguity in the human heart, and I think portrays evil as real and not as a caricature. It deals with evil.
Yeah, because it's funny if you like kind of dial up the contrast between good and evil too much, it becomes like a distorted picture.
Oh yeah.
I mean, even just think of like on
Cartoon.
your phone, like adjusting a photo. Like if you dial up some of those dials in photo editing too much, you just get something washed out that like is like this isn't. If I keep it like this, I would just delete this photo because it just it doesn't show me anything that I want to see in it. If you make like extreme caricatures of good and evil, like I remember catching once somehow like a tiny bit of what's it what that like Protestant movie on like the like Left Behind, I think it
Left
was.
Behind, yeah.
I think I caught like a little bit of like 10 minutes of it, and it was just like hysterical to watch what like it wasn't just that like things were really evil. It's like there was an unreality to its depiction of evil as well as its depiction of good.
Yeah.
And it's funny because that's also like that distorts the truth. Just like on the other hand, an artist, a writer who tries to blur the lines too much and be like, oh, you know, we got to write things that are very realistic and gritty because the world's gritty and there's a lot of ambiguity. So you don't ever show real good at all.
Mm-hmm.
You should like good is always polluted a little bit, or good is suspect, or good loses in the end.
Yeah.
There's a difference between showing, writing or showing a tragedy, which is that can be a beautiful piece of art, even though it's tragic, and somebody who's making basically a despairing or hopeless or nihilistic piece of
Well,
art.
that's the thing, is we can't glorify evil in art.
Right.
It shouldn't be something we hold up as like, this is the final word, because it's not. As Christians, we know there's something else. But, the Second Vatican Council, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Second Vatican Council talks about seeds of the word, where they talk about how there's preparations for the gospel in pretty much all kinds of different media. And I'm curious if you have any like secular movies, secular books, secular music that you're kind of like, wow, that would be like actually really connected to the gospel in this way. Like, I'll never forget when I was in college, we ran a retreat for middle schoolers based on the Black Eyed Peas song, Where's the Love? It was like the most, I mean, I'd never heard the song before, but I was like, this is like a totally secular band. But this song worked so well.
I think there's a lot of.
I don't know.
No, you can't think of
go
anything off
ahead.
the top of your head. No.
Yeah, I'm struggling. Like I know that there are songs that I've probably bookmarked that I'm struggling to think of right now.
We'll come back to it. We'll come back to it.
But I think that there's lots of examples of songs where like it like they either sounds like, or the artist intentionally is writing the song to sound like you're singing to or speaking about your love interest. But if you just swap in and make God the person, the you in the song, that's
you're all I want, you're all I need, you're the only one that makes me happy. Yeah, that could be about God or your girlfriend.
Right. Like, I think there's a bunch of songs like that. I've recently I found that a lot in electronic music, because there's a lot of electronic music that besides just wanting to evoke kind of emotions in general, electronic music that has lyrics to it, it can be reflective. I mean, some of it's just kind of like trashy and superficial, but like there is stuff that's like more reflective and melancholy, or like kind of like trying to deal with like past choices that you've made, and you see people kind of like weighing in the balance, like, yeah, I've kind of found I found good, but like it's also kind of in the shadow, and I'm not sure where I'm at yet. So I think there's definitely, I think it can be a good thing to be open to that where you find it.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get back to Lord of the Rings,
please,
because that was very heady. So what are some of the Catholic themes that both of you have seen in the movie or the book that kind of stand out in the story?
Well, from my recollection, all the characters seem to be struggling with something and growing at the same time in something, which I think make it relatable and interesting as I've gotten older. When I saw them when they came out, I couldn't pick up on those things, and it was just like the first movie to me was so stressful, just a lot of fear, right? And then the second movie was all war, which I thought was way more interesting. And then the third movie is just the culmination. It's so epic and satisfying. I don't know. I think there's a lot of themes, of Catholic themes in there. You can explain them better, Father.
Yeah, like it's, you can see a lot of growing in virtue in that, in the books and in the movies. Virtue is key to accomplishing, the good guys winning. Virtue is key.
Well, they had to resist the temptation of the ring.
Right.
If they succumb,
right,
the cause is lost.
The kind of the central mission has to do with accomplishing a task that it seems impossible, and I would even say is impossible on a natural level by purely like limited human creature power. And it also requires the resisting of temptation. So the thing that you have to do brings along with it this moral hazard, where this thing you're trying to destroy, the ring, is constantly tugging at your heart and offering things that are bad in themselves and are going to get in the way of you accomplishing the mission of destroying the ring.
Yeah.
So and that's how temptation works. Like vices and virtues call for one another. And so, like, if you're going to try to be courageous in doing this great heroic deed, you have to also be selfless. You have to be humble enough to do what's asked of you, and you have to be prudent, figuring out how to do it. You have to have a resilience to resist the temptation of other things that may not be as important as the main objective that God has given you.
Well, that was one of the themes that always stood out to me, was the necessity of sacrifice to fulfill one's calling. You know, because sometimes in life we choose our calling, right? If we choose our vocation, sometimes it's kind of like given to us from outside of us. We have to take care of an elderly parent, or, you know, we have a child with special needs, whatever it is. And the necessity that, you know, you're going to sacrifice even to the point of laying down your life to accomplish this thing that you didn't choose. And Frodo certainly did not choose that burden.
I've thought on many occasions, and even prayed with on many occasions, the scene in the books, and particularly in the movies, because I think the movies show it so well, where Frodo at the end of the first movie is remembering his words from earlier, where he says, "I wish the ring had never come to me. I wish none of this had happened." Because he felt that when they were down in the mines and there's a lot of peril and uncertainty, and he's feeling it even more now when he realizes he has to go it alone. And it's very likely he's going to his death.
Yeah.
And he certainly doesn't know how to accomplish this, even if it could work out. He doesn't know how to make it work out. But his job is to do something, do what he can. And he's just overwhelmed with that. And like you could see, like Elijah Wood acts so well in the movies, like a tear is just silently running down his face while he's like holding the ring and looking at it, and just kind of, you know, everything is unraveling all at once at this point in the movie. Like the fellowship is being broken up. People are being attacked. People are in danger. He has to escape. One of their friends has betrayed them. More betrayals on the way. And he just kind of throws up his hands, so to speak, and says, I wish none of this has happened. And by grace, I would say, by an act of providence, he recalls the words of Gandalf, who among other things is a prophet.
Right.
Who speaks the truth, speaks words from God, who reminds him, you know, so do all who live to see such times, but it's not for them to decide. All you have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to you.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's a powerful thought, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm sure many of us think, oh, gosh, 21st century, why am I here? This place is messed up, you know?
God has put each of us here on purpose.
Right.
I don't always like that, but I have to face that truth. It's a truth that God doesn't do things on, you know, by accident. He does it on purpose. So
right.
He's put me in the world. He's put you in the world in this location and at this time and around specific people very deliberately.
I think the person of Gandalf is one of the great secrets to the success of the entire trilogy, because that's I think it fulfills a deep yearning in our hearts for a wise father figure to guide us. You know, I don't know if you've ever felt that yearning in your heart. Maybe it's just something guys have. I don't know. But
I mean, I always looked up to my dad. Sure. I think I wrote a college essay. The most influential person in my life was my dad.
Oh, did you really? Oh, wow.
So
he was the Gandalf in your life.
Yeah. So it was always there. So I didn't have to long for it.
I was watching there's a beautiful movie on Formed. I don't know if you're familiar with Formed. It's like Catholic Netflix. It's called The Restless Heart. It's about St. Augustine. And the movie is meh. You know, it's okay. It's one of those Catholic movies that is just, you know, low budget and everything. But there was one scene that actually I was starting to cry when I saw it. And I was like, this is embarrassing. Thankfully no one was around. But it was the scene where St. Ambrose walks in and he starts arguing with the emperor for the freedom of his people. And just to be able to have, you know, this bearded, gnarly saint who's been grizzled in battle, willing to stand up for the people under him. I was like, wow, I long for that, you know, because you don't see that in our political leaders, and to be honest, you don't often see that in our ecclesiastical leaders either.
Right.
You know, so I think Gandalf really kind of scratches an itch that many people have in their hearts.
Yeah, Gandalf was Gandalf is basically an incarnate angel, and he's sent to Middle Earth with a mission, and his mission is to combat the working and the influence of Sauron, who's basically a devil character. But limitations are placed on Gandalf. He's not allowed to fight fire with fire. He's not allowed to match force of will with force of will. Evil dominates, manipulates, controls, suppresses, and Gandalf is forbidden to do likewise, even in the name of good. And so he has to rely on encouraging, rallying, bringing hope, bringing light into darkness, illuminating things, bringing wisdom and insight, showing compassion. And as it turns out, that is far more powerful than domination and control and oppression and the works of evil, even though the working of evil is flashier and more obvious. The appearance, it's real in its power. It's quite real, and it can do quite a lot of damage, but it's much more in your face. The working of providence, of grace, and of grace is much quieter, and so it's harder to see, but it's no less real and it's no less powerful. A scene that I also love in the first movie and the flashback at the beginning of the second, where you see Gandalf fighting the Balrog. Gandalf sort of like pulls back the curtain and shows something of who he really is. He says, he's facing a quite literal demon. That's basically on par with the sort of creature that he is, like a demon on the same power level as the sort of angel that he is. And he sort of invokes his authority and his who he is. He says, I'm a servant of the secret fire, a wielder of the flame of honor. And Tolkien in his backstory to the Lord of the Rings called the Silmarillion. Like the secret fire is another name for the Holy Spirit. Like that's very obviously plainly made in the Silmarillion. So Gandalf is saying, like when he finally has to lay down his own life, and because even though he's an angel, because he's incarnate, there's real pain. There's like death is a real sacrifice for him. He comes back, but that wasn't guaranteed. Gandalf.
See, I always thought he was a Christ figure because of that resurrection.
That too.
But it makes more sense, I guess.
The advantage of Tolkien not writing an allegory means that one person can represent several different types of people.
Yeah.
You can be Christ at one time, and then you can be a model of a saint, model of a Christian. It could be an angel. You can put on different hats.
One of the things that stood out to me was the Lembas bread, which of course is kind of a clear allusion to the Eucharist, right? In that you eat one, and that's all you need for the entire day. And I know Tolkien was very devoted to the Eucharist. In fact, it was one of my favorite quotes is what he wrote to his son much later on. He said something along the lines of, amidst this world which is so dark and depressing, I give you the one great thing to love, the Blessed Sacrament.
Yeah. The way that Lembas bread is described in the movies, and particularly in the books, it shines even more in the books, is this is very obviously not meant to like, oh, that's the Eucharist. There is no Eucharist in that world. It hasn't been instituted yet. Remember, this is a fictional pre-Christ world. But Tolkien allowed what he believed about the Eucharist to soak into what he wrote because he found that he wanted to say something true. Not saying the Lembas is the Eucharist, but he's like, I actually just want to speak about what the Eucharist is here.
Yeah.
Which is subtle, but it's different. It kind of gives you more freedom in what you do artistically. And he said that it has this spiritual side, like it nourishes not just your body, but your soul. It's described that like one bite is enough to fill the stomach of a grown man, but its real power is in its ability to sustain the soul. In the book, there's a point where Frodo and Sam are in Mordor, and you see that they're running on fumes. They're running on empty, physically and spiritually. And in the book, Tolkien says that Frodo and Sam would have long ago have laid down to die in Mordor, a place that is not just physically dark, but spiritually dark, not just physically dangerous, but spiritually dangerous. They would have long ago given up and just laid down where they lay in this barren land and given up it body and soul, if not for the Lembas. It had a virtue to sustain a spark of hope and the ability to put one foot in front of the other. And he even says that its virtue, its strength, its power grew the less it was mixed with other earthly food. And so the more that a person had to depend on it alone, the stronger its power. So
Interesting.
the more that,
Yeah.
This isn't like the reason he wrote this, but a thing that I draw out of that for my own spiritual benefit is that the more that I not, earthly food is good. Earthly good things are good. But there are things God has for me, for us, that will be untapped and inaccessible until we start leaning even more on God alone.
Right. With a couple minutes we have left, the character of Aragorn is such a pivotal character in the entire series, and you see the transformation that he goes from this rogue who's on the run to being the true king. What spiritual lessons did you take from that? I see.
Let's go to Father here.
What I'm seeing is that it's really kind of a symbol of each one of us in a sense, in that we are all kings and queens in disguise here on this earth, that we have to reveal the utter glory to which we are called through Christ when he crowns us in glory.
Yeah, well said. I guess it's following your mission, that God gave you, even through tremendous challenges, and then who you transform into as you go through that process.
Yeah, like he showed a great dedication to serving and protecting the ring bearer, and in proving himself worthy of the kingship that he was he rightfully could inherit, and also being worthy of marriage to Arwen, who he loved. And everything else was subordinate to those most good things.
Yeah.
And that's a great kind of way to live life. It's like, okay, what things are the most good, both in my eyes, but also ultimately in the eyes of something greater than myself, which we would say is God and his plan. And then subjecting the rest of what I want to those things in the order of their importance.
Yeah. I just want to conclude with a story that I think you might be able to relate to. So the first time I saw Lord of the Rings movie, I went with my sister to the theaters to watch it. And on the drive home, she kind of like stared off into the sunset and was like, why can't life be more like that? There's something that in these truly epic tales that stirs our hearts, because I think so often in our life, we're just bogged down with bills and doctor's appointments and just the day-to-day, like just trying to make it through. And we lose sight of the fact that we actually do live in an epic story, a truly epic one, which is not just fictional but real, where there is good and evil, and there's a territory that's trying to be taken, and that's the human heart, the human soul. And I think it's good to see our Christian faith through the lens of an epic story.
Yeah, it's there with the caveat that I think it's important to avoid what I kind of colloquially think of as Dungeons and Dragons Catholicism, where like you kind of like you turn grace and prayer into sort of magic spells. It's like, okay, if I do this thing, then this happens, and if I do get these sacraments and do these things, then
that would
that
would clearly be an error. Yeah.
As a that with a proper caveat, I think
but I think there's a yearning in the heart for a man to be a knight, for a woman to be a queen. Is there not? Is there? I don't know. You tell me.
Yeah, sure. I think with that, as we all want to be loved, like deeply, truly, fully, completely for who we are. That's probably most important.
But to really reveal the dignity of the person.
Yeah, I think one of the first steps is overcoming the distrust of God, right? Which is a result of original sin. That's the starting point, is we are separated and we distrust. So you work towards that, and then you can grow in your own conversion and your love of God. And then when you see yourself as loved by God, the whole world is better, right?
Yeah, that's true. And see ourselves as an irreplaceable part of the plan that God is unfolding.
And I think things like art, like Lord of the Rings, stories, movies, music, they can fuel the imagination, and that can be in service of our spiritual life. The imagination isn't just for making up things that aren't true. It's also for picturing things you know to be true. So, like if I ask you to picture the house you live in now, or the house you grew up in, like that's a real place, or those were real places that you were. So using that for our spiritual growth is actually really powerful and useful.
Sure.
So
Ignatius talks about the imaginative prayer. Yeah,
exactly. So having an epic story like Lord of the Rings to help you understand truths, like we didn't even get into this, but like there's some great depictions that helped me to understand Mary better in Lord of the Rings, Arwen and Galadriel, and just in the movies, watching scenes where they kind of show their glory, show their strength, show their wisdom and their power, helped me to appreciate Mary better. Not because Mary is, like a level 25 elf queen, sorceress. It's
right.
Like it's not that. It's not Dungeons and Dragons, but the artistry of showing Frodo dying from a spiritual wound, body and soul, and then a person who is immortal showing up, and because of this weird state that Frodo's in, being able to see not only the body of the person, but that she's glowing with light, seeing kind of the spirituality, the radiance of her soul, and her speaking words of healing and truth and conveying grace. The fact that she carries Frodo to safety, the fact that she's strong, the fact that she invokes the water, this power to sweep away evil. Like these are all things that are true about Mary. And Mary doesn't do that in a flashy movie style way, but seeing artistic depictions of that sort of thing can help me appreciate the way that Mary interacts invisibly with us.
Yeah.
And I think that's true of all like the saints of God. And
the heart desires an epic story, and that's why it resonates with us so well. So thank you, Father Perrella, for joining us for these episodes. Thank you, Lauren, for
some commentary. One final question: are you someone that sends Lord of the Rings gifts?
No, I don't. I try to avoid sending gifts because it's a very elder millennial thing to do. And so I try to avoid that because it just makes me seem old.
For all of our boomers out there, that's GIF, not GIFT.
Yeah,
well,
we're not sending gifts.
At my cousin's wedding, I befriended this guy who's in his 40s, but it turns out he doesn't believe in Christ, is not religious, but he loves Lord of the Rings. So I was like, oh, this is good. This is good. Like something's working in him, even though he's denying God, and he's someone that just sends him all the time.
Yeah. Well, so. God can use that. He can use a person's appreciation for good in one way to then kind of sneak in the door and bring them to deeper conversion.
That's what we pray. Amen. Well, thank you for joining us on this episode of Restless. I'm Father Joseph Gill, and we're coming at you from Norwalk, Connecticut. And you can find us on 1350 AM, 103.9 FM, wherever you get your podcasts. So tune in next time to Restless.